The rain hammered against the windows of the military briefing room like bullets against steel. Captain Sarah Chen stood at attention, her uniform pressed to perfection, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. She had spent 3 years waiting for this moment, 3 years proving herself in a world that seemed determined to keep her on the sidelines. "Commander?" James Harrison sat behind his massive oak desk, fingers steepled together, a slight smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. He was a man who had seen 30 years of service, a man whose chest was decorated with medals that told stories of courage and tactical brilliance. He was also a man who believed that certain jobs required certain types of people. And Sarah Chen was not that type. "You want to lead the extraction team into the Karzai Valley," he said. Not as a question, but as a statement laced with disbelief. His eyes scanned the mission proposal she had submitted, and then he did something that would fuel Sarah's determination for months to come. He laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a full, belly-deep laugh that echoed off the walls of his office. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept her composure. She had expected resistance, but not mockery. "Sir, I've studied the terrain for 6 months. I've run simulations, consulted with local informants, and developed a strategy that minimizes risk while maximizing our chances of success." Harrison leaned back in his chair, still grinning. "Chen, do you know how many captains have walked through that door with grand plans? Do you know how many thought they had the answer to problems that generals have been wrestling with for years?" He shook his head slowly. "The Karzai Valley isn't some training exercise. It's a death trap. We've lost good soldiers there, experienced soldiers, which is exactly why we need a different approach," Sarah replied, her voice steady, despite the anger building in her chest. "Every mission we've sent has followed the same playbook. The enemy knows our moves before we make them. They've studied us just as much as we've studied them." "Oh?" The commander's smile faded slightly. He picked up her proposal, flipping through pages that detailed unconventional routes, unexpected timing, and tactics that broke from standard military doctrine. "You're suggesting we throw out years of proven strategy for what? A hunch? A feeling?" "Not a hunch, sir. Analysis. The terrain, the enemy patterns, the weather systems, even the local market schedules. Everything points to a narrow window of opportunity that opens up once every 3 weeks. We have that window coming up in 9 days. Harrison tossed the proposal back onto his desk. "You know what your problem is, Chen? You think being smart is enough? You think because you graduated top of your class at the academy, because you can run circles around the other officers in tactical simulations, that you're ready for the real thing? But out there, in the field, it's not about clever plans. It's about experience, instinct, and the ability to lead men who might not want to follow you into hell." The last part stung, because Sarah knew there was truth in it. She had faced doubt from her peers since day one. Being a woman in a combat leadership role was still controversial, even in progressive military circles. Some soldiers respected competence regardless of gender. Others saw her as a diversity hire, someone promoted to fill quotas rather than because she had earned her place. "With respect, sir, how am I supposed to gain that experience if I'm never given the chance?" Sarah's voice carried an edge now, the professional mask slipping just slightly. "I've requested field assignments 7 times in the past 2 years. Each time, I've been passed over for officers with less training and lower evaluation scores. I'm not asking for a favor. I'm asking for the opportunity to do my job." Commander Harrison stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the base. Rain continued to streak down the glass, distorting the view of soldiers running drills in the distance. "You know what happens if this mission fails? Those hostages die. Our people die. And I have to write letters to families explaining why I sent an untested captain on a mission that required seasoned leadership. And if we do nothing, if we keep sending teams that get ambushed because they're too predictable..." Sarah took a step forward. "Sir, I know you don't believe in me, but I believe in this mission. Give me a small team. Let me prove that this approach works. If I'm wrong, I'll resign my commission. You'll never hear from me again about field assignments." Harrison turned back to face her, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, the only sound was the rain and the distant, muffled shouts of drill sergeants. You're willing to bet your entire career on this? I'm willing to bet everything, Sarah said without hesitation. The commander studied her face, looking for any sign of doubt or fear. He found none. Finally, he sighed, a deep, weary sound. You remind me of someone I used to know. Someone who got a lot of good people killed because he was too stubborn to admit when he was wrong. Sarah felt her hopes sinking, but Harrison continued. He was also one of the bravest soldiers I ever served with. Sometimes being right matters more than being safe. He picked up her proposal again, this time reading it more carefully. You'll have your team, but it won't be who you want. I'm assigning Lieutenant Marcus Reed as your second in command. Sarah's eyes widened slightly. Marcus Reed was known throughout the base as a skeptic, someone who questioned every decision and made no secret of his belief that women didn't belong in combat leadership roles. Pairing them was either Harrison's way of ensuring the mission had proper oversight, or his way of setting Sarah up for failure. Possibly both. I can work with Lieutenant Reed, Sarah said, though her stomach churned at the prospect. You'll have to do more than work with him. You'll need to earn his respect and the respect of every soldier on that team. They need to believe in you, Chen. Not because you have good ideas, but because they trust you to bring them home alive. Harrison walked back to his desk and pulled out a file thick with classified documents. The hostages in the Karzai Valley are not just any civilians. One of them is Dr. Robert Martinez, a medical researcher who is providing aid to local villages. The other two are his assistants. Martinez has information about a biological program that could pose a significant threat if it falls into the wrong hands. We need him extracted within 2 weeks, or we have orders to ensure that information doesn't get out by any means necessary. The implication was clear and chilling. If Sarah's team couldn't rescue Martinez, another team would be sent to eliminate him. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders like a physical burden. The terrain is mountainous. The enemy presence is significant, and local cooperation is unreliable at best, Harrison continued. You'll be dropped 20 kilometers from the target location. No air support once you're in, no backup if things go wrong. You get in, secure the hostages, and get out. Anything else is mission failure. Sarah took the file, her hand steady despite the magnitude of what she was undertaking. I understand, sir. I hope you do. Harrison's expression softened just slightly. For what it's worth, I hope you prove me wrong. I hope you come back with those hostages and a story about how some captain with a crazy plan did what my best teams couldn't. But hope isn't strategy. Chen, out there you'll need to be perfect. Sarah turned to leave. Harrison called out one more time. And Chen? That window of opportunity you mentioned in your proposal. If you miss it, don't bother coming back. The enemy will be expecting us after that, and this whole region will become too hot for any extraction attempts. This is your one shot. Sarah nodded, understanding the finality of his words. She stepped out of the office into the corridor, clutching the file against her chest. Other officers passed by, some nodding in greeting, others ignoring her entirely. She had 9 days to assemble her team, finalize her plans, and prepare for a mission that could either launch her career or end it permanently. The rain had lessened to a drizzle. By the time she crossed the base toward the operations center, her mind was already racing through logistics, equipment needs, and the challenge of working with Lieutenant Reed. She had reviewed his file before her meeting with Harrison. Reed was a competent soldier, by the book and reliable. But he had made his opinions about female officers clear in multiple after-action reports. He believed in merit, he claimed. And he didn't think women had earned their place in combat roles. Working with him would be like carrying extra weight up a mountain. But Sarah had been carrying extra weight her entire military career. Every success had to be twice as good as a male counterpart's to be noticed. Every mistake was magnified and used as evidence that women weren't cut out for military leadership. She pushed open the door to the operations center, where maps and satellite images covered every available surface. Sergeant David Park looked up from a computer terminal, his weathered face breaking into a genuine smile. Captain Chen, heard you were meeting with the commander. How'd it go? Sarah set the file down on a table and allowed herself a small smile. I got the mission. Park's eyebrows shot up. The Karzai Valley extraction. Seriously. He stood up, crossing the room to look at the file. That's been on the board for months. Nobody wanted to touch it after what happened to Bravo team. I know, that's why we're going to do it differently. Sarah opened the file, spreading out maps and intelligence reports. We have 9 days to prepare. I need you to help me identify supplies, weapons, and communication equipment that can handle mountain terrain. Park studied the maps, his expression growing more serious. You know Reed is assigned as your second? Harrison told me. Sarah traced a route on the map with her finger, following a path through narrow valleys and steep ridges. Reed doesn't have to like me. He just has to follow orders. It's more complicated than that, Park said quietly. Reed lost a close friend on a mission 2 years ago. The team leader made a call that Reed disagreed with, and 5 soldiers died. He's been cautious ever since, sometimes to a fault. If he thinks your plan puts the team at risk, he'll fight you every step of the way. Era absorbed this information, adding it to her mental profile of her second-time command. Then I'll need to make sure my plan is airtight. No room for doubt, no room for error. Park looked at her with something like admiration mixed with concern. You really think you can pull this off? I have to, Sarah replied simply. Because if I don't, 3 people die. And I'll spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have made a difference. As she began to plan in earnest, marking routes and calculating supply needs, Sarah felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with preparation. This was what she had trained for, what she had sacrificed for. Commander Harrison's laugh echoed in her memory. But instead of discouraging her, it strengthened her resolve. She would prove them all wrong. She would break every rule that needed breaking, challenge every assumption that deserved challenging, and bring those hostages home. And when it was over, no one would ever laugh at Captain Sarah Chen again. Lieutenant Marcus Reed stood in the briefing room with his arms crossed, his jaw set in a hard line. He was a tall man with close-cropped hair and eyes that had seen too much combat to be easily impressed. When Captain Sarah Chen walked in carrying her presentation materials, he didn't bother to hide his skepticism. Let's get one thing straight, Reed said before Sarah could even set down her equipment. I'm here because Commander Harrison ordered me to be here. Not because I think this mission has any chance of success, and definitely not because I think you're qualified to lead it. Sarah had prepared herself for this confrontation, but hearing the words spoken so bluntly still stung. She took a breath, reminding herself that she didn't need Reed to like her. She just needed him to do his job. Your opinion is noted, Lieutenant. Now, if you'll take a seat, we have a lot of ground to cover. Reed didn't move. Do you know how many missions I've run in territories like this? 17. Do you know how many hostage extractions I've personally led or assisted with? 9. My question for you, Captain, is how many have you led? The silence that followed was heavy. Sarah met his gaze without flinching. None. But I've studied every successful and failed extraction mission conducted in this region over the past decade. I've analyzed weather patterns, enemy movement, local customs, and terrain challenges. What I lack in field experience, I make up for in preparation and strategic thinking. Books don't shoot back, Reed said flatly. Simulations don't account for the chaos of real combat. You can prepare all you want, but when bullets start flying and people start dying, your fancy theories won't mean anything. Sarah walked to the front of the room and pulled up a satellite image on the screen. You're right. Experience matters. That's why you're here. But experience without adaptation leads to predictable patterns, and predictable patterns get people killed. Every mission sent into the Karzai Valley has followed standard extraction protocols. The enemy knows those protocols. They've set up ambush points along every logical route. What we're going to do is take an illogical route. Reed finally moved, stepping closer to study the screen. That's a goat trail. Maybe 2 feet wide in places, exposed to enemy positions on 3 sides, and completely impassable if the weather turns. Only impassable if we follow it during normal operational hours, Sarah countered. She clicked to the next slide, showing weather data. But if we move during the early morning hours between 3 and 5 a.m., we hit a thermal inversion that creates ground fog in the valleys. We'll have natural cover for most of the approach. The enemy won't expect movement during that window because visibility is terrible for everyone. But we'll have thermal imaging and night vision. We turn their defensive advantage into our advantage. Reed studied the data, his expression unreadable. And if the fog doesn't form? If the weather patterns shift? Then we abort and wait for the next window, Sarah said. But the patterns have been consistent for the past 8 years, according to meteorological records. We have a 92% probability of favorable conditions. 8% is a lot of room for things to go wrong. Reed crossed his arms again. What about extraction? Even if we reach the hostages, even if we get them out of the compound, we still have to cross 20 kilometers of hostile territory to reach the extraction point. Sarah clicked to another slide showing a detailed timeline. The enemy shifts guards at dawn. For approximately 15 minutes, there's a gap in their patrol coverage while the night shift reports and the day shift deploys. We'll use that window to move through their perimeter. Once we're clear, we'll travel light and fast, avoiding main roads entirely. Our extraction point is here. She pointed to a clearing near a dried riverbed. It's not the closest point, but it's the safest. The terrain makes it difficult for enemy vehicles to pursue, and satellite imagery shows minimal activity in that sector. Reed walked around the table, examining the maps from different angles. Despite his obvious reservations, Sarah could see him engaging with the plan, looking for holes, testing its logic. This was the part she had prepared for. The questions she knew would come. What about the hostages? Reed asked. Martinez is in his 60s. The medical reports say he has a heart condition. Can he handle a forced march through mountain terrain? We'll have to field medics on the team, Sarah replied. And we're carrying a portable stretcher system that can be assembled in under a minute. If Martinez can't walk, we'll carry him. I've calculated the weight distribution and travel time with that scenario in mind, and the other hostages, his assistants. Sarah pulled up photos of the 2 younger people who had been captured along with Dr. Martinez. Jennifer Walsh, 28, former college athlete with experience in wilderness survival. David Kim, 32, marathon runner who has competed at the national level. Both are in good physical condition. They've been in captivity for 6 weeks, which may have weakened them, but intelligence suggests they're being kept in relatively good health. Martinez is valuable to the enemy, which means keeping him and his team alive is in their interest. Reed paced to the window. Looking out over the training grounds where other soldiers were preparing for their own missions, "You've thought this through," he admitted reluctantly. "I'll give you that. But thinking and doing are different things. Have you considered what happens when everything goes wrong? Because it will. Something always goes wrong. That's why we have contingency plans." Sarah distributed folders to the empty chairs where the rest of the team would soon sit. 3 primary contingencies and 2 emergency fallbacks. If we're compromised during insertion, we have alternate routes. If the hostages are moved before we arrive, we have tracking protocols. If we lose communication with command, we have predetermined decision points. Reed picked up one of the folders, flipping through pages of detailed plans. This is more thorough than most mission briefs I've seen from officers with 10 years of experience. He looked up at her, his expression still guarded but slightly less hostile. But you're missing something critical. Sarah felt a flash of concern. She had spent weeks on this plan, checking and rechecking every detail. What am I missing? The human element. Reed tossed the folder back on the table. You've planned for terrain, weather, enemy positions, equipment failures, but you haven't addressed the fact that the soldiers following you into that valley don't know you. They don't trust you. Some of them don't think you should even be leading this mission. So what do you suggest? Sarah asked, keeping her voice level. Earn it. Reed leaned against the table. You've got 9 days before we deploy. Use that time to train with the team. Show them you can handle the physical demands. Prove you can make split-second decisions under pressure. Talk to them as people, not just assets on a mission manifest. Because when we're out there and things start falling apart, they need to believe that following your orders is their best chance of survival. It was solid advice, and Sarah knew it. She had been so focused on the tactical aspects of the mission that she had underestimated the importance of team cohesion. You're right, she acknowledged. I'll make that a priority. Reed seemed surprised by her willingness to accept criticism. Most officers get defensive when you point out their blind spots. Most officers are more concerned with protecting their ego than completing the mission, Sarah replied. I don't have time for ego. I just want to bring everyone home alive. For the first time since entering the room, Reed's expression softened slightly. He didn't smile, but the hard edge in his eyes diminished. All right, Captain. I'm still not convinced this is going to work, but I'll give you a fair chance. Just understand that if I see something that puts the team at unnecessary risk, I'll speak up. Loudly. I wouldn't want it any other way, Sarah said. A second-in-command who just agrees with everything is useless. I need someone who will challenge my decisions and catch mistakes I might miss. The door to the briefing room opened, and Sergeant Park entered, followed by 4 other soldiers. These were the team members Harrison had assigned. Corporal Lisa Torres, a communications specialist with 3 tours in hostile territories. Private First Class James Crawford, a weapons expert known for his marksmanship. Specialist Maya Patel, a field medic with trauma surgery experience. And Sergeant First Class Robert Johnson, a demolitions expert who had served with Reed on previous missions. Sarah watched as they filed in, noting their body language, the way they interacted with each other and responded to her presence. Torres was professional, her expression neutral. Crawford looked curious but guarded. Patel seemed genuinely interested. Johnson, however, exchanged a look with Reed that spoke volumes about shared doubts. Thank you all for coming, Sarah began. I know some of you may have concerns about this mission and about my leadership. That's fair. What I'm asking you to do is difficult and dangerous. But I believe we have a real chance to succeed where other teams have failed. And I want to show you why. She spent the next 2 hours walking them through every aspect of the plan, answering questions, addressing concerns, and demonstrating that she had considered variables they hadn't even thought to ask about. Torres asked about communication redundancies. Crawford questioned weapon selections. Patel wanted to know about medical contingencies. Johnson challenged her timeline at multiple points. Sarah answered every question with confidence and detail, but she also listened when team members suggested improvements. When Crawford recommended a different rifle configuration for mountain terrain, she agreed and updated the equipment list. When Patel pointed out a potential medical issue she had overlooked, Sarah thanked her and adjusted the plan accordingly. By the end of the briefing, the atmosphere in the room had shifted. The soldiers weren't fully convinced yet, but they were engaged. They were thinking like a team rather than a group of skeptics waiting for failure. We start training tomorrow at 0500, Sarah announced. Full gear, mountain simulation course. I'll be running it with you. Lieutenant Reed will evaluate our performance and identify weak points. We have 9 days to become the best prepared team this base has ever seen. Questions. Johnson raised his hand. Just one, Captain. What happens if we get out there and your plan falls apart? It was the question they all wanted to ask, the fear that lurked beneath every military operation. Sarah met his gaze directly. Then we adapt. We use our training, our experience, and our judgment to find a new way forward. That's what good soldiers do. But I don't intend to let the plan fall apart. I intend to prepare so thoroughly that when challenges arise, we're ready for them. And if we're not ready, Johnson pressed. Then people die, Sarah said bluntly. That's the reality of what we do. But I promise you this, I will do everything in my power to make sure we're prepared. I will train harder than anyone on this team. I will double-check every detail, question every assumption, and leave nothing to chance. All I ask is that you give me the same level of commitment. The room was silent for a moment, and then Torres spoke up. I've read your file, Captain. Top scores in tactical analysis, strategic planning, and crisis management. But this is different from the academy. Are you really ready for this? Sarah appreciated the directness of the question. Honestly, I don't know. I've never done anything like this before. But I've prepared as thoroughly as possible, and I have a team of experienced soldiers to help me succeed. I'm not pretending to have all the answers. What I have is a solid plan and the willingness to listen to people who know more than I do about certain aspects of this mission. Reed spoke up from the back of the room. For what it's worth, the captain's plan is sound. I've reviewed it from every angle I can think of, and it addresses most of the major risks. That doesn't mean it's perfect, and it doesn't mean things won't go wrong. But it's better than anything else we've tried in that region, coming from Reed. That endorsement carried weight. Sarah saw the other team members exchange glances, recalibrating their assessments. "All right, people," Sarah said, bringing the meeting to a close. "Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow, we start working as a unit." Dismissed. As the soldiers filed out, Reed lingered behind. "That wasn't terrible," he said, which Sarah suspected was the closest thing to a compliment she would get from him. "High praise," she replied with a slight smile. "Don't let it go to your head." Reed picked up one of the maps. "You handled their questions well, but the real test starts tomorrow. Physical training will tell us a lot about whether you can keep up with the demands of this mission." "I can keep up," Sarah said with quiet confidence. "We'll see." Reed headed for the door, but paused before leaving. "One more thing, Captain. That answer you gave Johnson about people dying if we're not ready? That was good. Honest. The team needs to know you understand what's at stake." After he left, Sarah sat alone in the briefing room, surrounded by maps and mission documents. The enormity of what she was attempting settled over her like a heavy blanket. 9 days to prepare for a mission that would test everything she had learned, everything she believed about herself. She thought about Commander Harrison's laugh, about the doubt she had faced throughout her career, about the 3 hostages waiting in the Karzai Valley for someone to save them. Failure wasn't an option. It never had been. Sarah began gathering her materials, her mind already racing ahead to the training exercises she would design. The skills she would need to demonstrate, the trust she would need to build. The next 9 days would determine not just the success of this mission, but the entire trajectory of her military career. As she left the briefing room and stepped out into the cool evening air, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Genuine hope mixed with fierce determination. She had been given a chance, however grudgingly. Now she just had to prove she deserved it. The alarm shattered the pre-dawn silence at 4:30 in the morning. Sarah had barely slept, her mind churning through mission details and contingency plans. She dressed quickly in her training gear and made her way to the obstacle course, where her team would be waiting. She arrived 15 minutes early, but Reed was already there, checking equipment and making notes on a clipboard. He looked up as she approached, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Couldn't sleep either?" Sarah asked. "Old habit," Reed replied. "I like to see what I'm working with before anyone else shows up." He gestured to several large packs lined up near the starting point. "Those are loaded to match what we'll be carrying on the actual mission. 50 pounds each, plus weapons. We'll be running the mountain course, which is 8 kilometers, with elevation changes that simulate what we'll face in the valley." Sarah walked over to one of the packs and hefted it onto her shoulders. The weight settled across her back like a living thing, pulling at her muscles. She had trained with heavy packs before, but this was more than she had carried in recent months. Reed watched her adjust the straps, saying nothing but clearly evaluating her every move. The rest of the team arrived precisely at 5 o'clock. They looked alert despite the early hour. Professionals who knew that proper rest and preparation could mean the difference between life and death. Without being told, each soldier claimed a pack and began their own pre-exercise checks. "All right, listen up," Sarah called out, her voice carrying across the training area. "Today's exercise has 3 objectives. First, we build physical conditioning for the terrain we'll be facing. Second, we practice moving as a unit, under load. Third, we identify any equipment issues before they become problems in the field." Questions. Crawford raised his hand. "What's our time target, Captain?" "Standard time for this course with full load is 90 minutes, Sarah replied. "I want us to complete it in... That gives us a buffer for the actual mission when we're dealing with stress, fatigue, and potential enemy contact." Johnson whistled low. "That's pushing it pretty hard for a first run." "We don't have time for gradual progression," Sarah said. "We deploy in 8 days. Every training session needs to push our limits." She turned to Reed. "Lieutenant, you'll take the rear position and monitor our formation. Call out anyone who falls behind or shows signs of struggling." Reed nodded, his approval evident despite his typical stoic expression. "Move out when ready, Captain." Sarah adjusted her pack one final time, and started down the trail. The course began with a steep incline that immediately tested leg strength and cardiovascular endurance. She set a steady pace, fast enough to be challenging, but sustainable for the full distance. Behind her, she could hear the team falling into formation, their boots crunching on gravel, their breathing gradually becoming more labored. The first kilometer was manageable. Sarah's regular training regimen had prepared her well, and she found her rhythm quickly. The pack's weight became familiar, and her legs found their stride. She focused on breathing properly, maintaining form, and staying aware of her surroundings. At the 2-kilometer mark, the trail turned sharply upward. This was where the course earned its reputation. The incline was brutal, and the loose rocks made every step treacherous. Sarah felt her thighs burning, her lungs working harder to pull in oxygen. Sweat began to soak through her shirt despite the cool morning air. "Torres is falling back," Reed's voice called from behind. "Crawford, close up that gap." Sarah resisted the urge to look back. Trust the team. Let them do their jobs. She pushed harder, demonstrating through action rather than words that she expected maximum effort from everyone, including herself. At 3 kilometers, they reached a rope climb, a nearly vertical ascent of 15 meters up a cliff face. This was the course's signature obstacle, the one that separated those who could handle mountain operations from those who couldn't. Sarah reached the base and didn't hesitate. She gripped the rope and began climbing, using her legs to drive upward while her arms controlled her ascent. Halfway up, her forearms began to scream. The pack's weight wanted to pull her backward, and her grip was starting to slip from the combination of sweat and fatigue. She thought about Commander Harrison's laugh, about every time someone had doubted her capability. That anger, that need to prove them wrong, gave her a burst of strength. She powered through the last several meters and pulled herself over the top. Below, the team was beginning their own climbs. Patel moved with surprising speed for someone who typically worked in medical roles. Crawford showed the upper body strength expected from a weapons specialist. Torres struggled slightly, her smaller frame working against her, but she kept moving steadily upward. Johnson was having the most difficulty. He was a big man, heavily muscled, and the rope climb wasn't designed for his body type. Sarah watched him grit his teeth and force his way upward through sheer determination. When he finally reached the top, he was breathing hard, but there was respect in his eyes when he looked at Sarah. "You didn't wait," he gasped between breaths. "The enemy won't wait for us," Sarah replied. "We keep moving, always forward." "Ready?" Johnson nodded, and the team pressed on. The next section was a technical descent, requiring careful footwork and trust in their equipment. Sarah led them down a series of switchbacks, demonstrating proper technique for controlling momentum while carrying heavy loads. One mistake here could mean a twisted ankle, or worse, the kind of injury that would end the mission before it started. At kilometer 5, Patel called out from the middle of the formation. "Captain Torres needs a moment. She's dealing with a cramp." Sarah held up a hand and the team stopped. She made her way back to where Torres was standing, one hand pressed against her side. The communications specialist looked frustrated more than pained. "It's nothing," Torres insisted. "Just a stitch. Give me 30 seconds. Sarah studied her carefully. Torres was tough, that was clear, but pushing through pain without addressing the cause could lead to bigger problems. "Take off your pack," Sarah ordered. "Captain, I'm fine. That wasn't a request, Corporal." Sarah's tone was firm but not harsh. "If your pack's sitting wrong, it can cause breathing problems and muscle cramps. Let's fix it now, before it becomes a real issue." Torres reluctantly removed her pack, and Sarah examined the straps. One of the shoulder attachments had shifted, creating uneven weight distribution. She adjusted it, tightened the hip belt, and redistributed some of the load. "Try that." Torres put the pack back on and immediately noticed the difference. "That's better." "Thank you, Captain. We take care of each other," Sarah said simply. "That's how we all come home." She raised her voice so the whole team could hear. "Everyone, check your pack setup. If something feels wrong, say something. Pride gets people hurt." The team took 2 minutes to verify their equipment, and then they were moving again. The brief stop had actually improved morale. Sarah could sense it in the way the team moved with slightly more cohesion, slightly more trust in their leader. The final 3 kilometers were a test of mental endurance more than physical capability. Legs were tired, shoulders ached, and the weight of the pack seemed to increase with every step. This was where training separated from actual performance. Anyone could complete a course when fresh. True capability showed when exhaustion set in and willpower had to carry you forward. Sarah forced herself to maintain pace even as her body screamed for rest. She thought about Dr. Martinez and his team, held captive for weeks. Depending on soldiers, they didn't know to risk their lives for a rescue. That thought kept her moving when her muscles wanted to quit. At kilometer 7, Reed called out again, "Captain, we're at 60 minutes." On pace for 7-5, Sarah pushed slightly harder, aware that the final kilometer included a water obstacle. They reached it with 5 minutes to spare, a fast-moving stream that had to be crossed while maintaining balance and protecting equipment. The water was cold, fed by mountain snowmelt, and the rocks were slippery. Sarah entered the water first, feeling the shock of cold against her legs. The current was stronger than it looked, pushing against her, trying to knock her off balance. She moved carefully, testing each foothold before committing her weight. The team followed, spreading out to avoid creating a pileup if someone fell. Crawford lost his footing halfway across, his boots slipping on algae-covered stone. He went down hard, splashed loud in the morning quiet, but he kept his weapon up and dry, protected the communications gear strapped to his pack, and was back on his feet in seconds. He caught Sarah's eye and gave a quick nod. No harm done, just a reminder of how quickly things could go wrong. They cleared the stream and hit the final stretch, a relatively flat run to the finish line. Sarah could see the end now, the markers that would signal completion. She dug deep, finding reserves of energy she didn't know she had, and sprinted the last 200 meters. The team responded, matching her pace despite their fatigue. They crossed the finish line together at 73 minutes, 2 minutes better than the target. As soon as they stopped, several team members bent over, hands on knees, gasping for air. Sarah was breathing hard too, sweat dripping from her face, her legs trembling slightly from exertion. But she remained standing, scanning her team to assess their condition. Reed checked his stopwatch and made notes. 73 minutes, 12 seconds. That's the fastest time I've seen for this course with full mission load. He looked at Sarah with something that might have been grudging respect. "Not bad, Captain." "Not bad isn't good enough," Sarah replied, still catching her breath. "We need to be better. Tomorrow, we run it again, and we shave off another 2 minutes. After that, we do it at night with limited visibility. Then we do it in the rain. By deployment day, this course should feel easy." Johnson straightened up, still breathing hard. "You're serious? Every day for the next 8 days?" "Every day," Sarah confirmed. "Plus, tactical drills, weapons practice, communication protocols, and medical emergency scenarios. We're going to train until this mission runs on muscle memory and instinct." Patel actually smiled. "I think I'm starting to understand why Command approved this mission despite the risks. You're not planning to succeed. You're planning to dominate." "There's no middle ground in hostage extraction," Sarah said. "We either bring them home or we don't. I refuse to accept the second option." Over the next week, Sarah pushed the team harder than they had ever been pushed. They ran the obstacle course daily, their time improving with each iteration. They practiced tactical scenarios in the mock-up village, learning to move as a fluid unit to communicate without words, to anticipate each other's actions. Sarah trained alongside them for every exercise, often staying late to run extra drills with team members who wanted additional practice. Crawford worked with her on precision shooting in low-light conditions. Torres helped her understand the nuances of field communication equipment. Patel taught her advanced first aid techniques that went beyond standard training. Most importantly, Sarah spent time talking with each team member individually, learning their backgrounds, their motivations, their fears. She discovered that Johnson had a daughter about to graduate high school. Torres was sending money home to support her younger siblings through college. Crawford was planning to propose to his girlfriend after this deployment. Patel had left a promising civilian medical career to serve in the military. because she felt called to help people in the most desperate circumstances. These weren't just names on a roster. They were people with lives, families, dreams. Understanding that made Sarah even more determined to bring them all home safely. Reed continued to challenge her at every turn, questioning decisions, testing her reasoning, and pushing her to consider scenarios she hadn't planned for. But as the days passed, his challenges became less about undermining her authority and more about strengthening the mission plan. They were starting to work as partners rather than adversaries. On the 6th day, they ran a full mission simulation from insertion to extraction. The training took 14 hours, conducted mostly in darkness, with role players acting as enemy forces and hostile civilians. The team had to navigate to the target location, breach a secured compound, secure 3 mock hostages, and extract under simulated enemy fire. Things went wrong almost immediately. The initial approach route was compromised by enemy patrols, forcing Sarah to make a real-time decision to switch to an alternate path. Then Crawford's primary weapon jammed during the compound breach, requiring quick adaptation. One of the mock hostages refused to cooperate, simulating the panic and resistance that traumatized civilians sometimes displayed during rescue operations. But the team adapted. They communicated effectively, supported each other through challenges, and completed the exercise successfully. When it was over, exhausted but triumphant, the team gathered for a debrief. "That was chaos," Torres said, but she was smiling. "Controlled chaos, but still chaos. That's what the real mission will be like," Reed added. "Except with real bullets and real consequences. But you all handled it. Not perfectly, but well enough that I think we actually have a chance." Sarah looked around at her team, seeing them truly for the first time not as assigned soldiers, but as a cohesive unit that had been forged through shared hardship and mutual trust. "Thank you," she said simply, "for trusting this plan and for trusting me. I know it hasn't been easy." Johnson spoke up, his usually gruff voice softer than normal. "You earned it, Captain. Every step of the way. We're ready to follow you into that valley." The others murmured agreement, and Sarah felt a surge of emotion that she quickly pushed down. There would be time for reflection after the mission. Right now, they still had work to do. On the final day before deployment, Commander Harrison called Sarah to his office. She entered expecting another warning or last-minute doubt. Instead, she found him studying mission reports with a thoughtful expression. "Your training metrics are impressive," he said without preamble. "Lieutenant Reed says the team is operating at peak efficiency. Even he admits he was wrong about your capabilities." Reed said that. Sarah couldn't hide her surprise. Harrison allowed himself a small smile. Not in those exact words, but close enough. "He thinks you're still too inexperienced for this mission, but he also thinks you might just pull it off." The smile faded. "I'm not going to pretend I've changed my mind about sending you. I still think this is a risk. But I respect preparation and dedication, and you've demonstrated both. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you come back with those hostages." Harrison pulled out a sealed envelope. "These are your final orders and authorization codes. Once you're in the field, communication will be limited. You'll have to schedule check-in windows. If you miss both, we'll assume the mission has failed and proceed with alternative measures." The weight of those words settled on Sarah's shoulders. Alternative measures meant a strike team sent to eliminate Dr. Martinez before his knowledge could be exploited. No pressure. "I understand, sir." Rassin stood and extended his hand. "Good luck, Captain Chen. Prove me wrong." Sarah shook his hand firmly. "I intend to, sir." As she left his office for what might be the last time, Sarah felt the full magnitude of what awaited her. Tomorrow, they would board helicopters and fly into one of the most dangerous regions in the world. They would attempt a rescue that others had deemed impossible. Lives hung in the balance. Careers would be made or destroyed, and success required everything to go almost perfectly. Sarah had spent her entire military career preparing for a moment like this. Now, finally, she would discover if all that preparation was enough. The helicopter blades cut through the night. Air with a rhythmic thump that Sarah could feel in her chest. She sat among her team, faces painted with camouflage, weapons checked and rechecked, eyes focused on the task ahead. The aircraft flew dark, no lights except the faint glow of instrumentation in the cockpit. They were 20 minutes from the drop point. Sarah's mind ran through the mission parameters one final time. The weather data had confirmed her predictions. Ground fog was forming in the valleys, providing the cover they needed. Enemy patrol patterns matched what intelligence had predicted. The window of opportunity was opening exactly as planned. Reed sat across from her, his expression calm despite the danger they were flying toward. He caught her eye and gave a slight nod. No words were needed. They both understood what was coming. The pilot's voice crackled through their headsets. 5 minutes to drop zone. Weather conditions are favorable. No enemy radar activity detected. Sarah made a circling motion with her hand, the signal for final equipment check. Each team member verified their gear one last time, a ritual that focused the mind and ensured nothing critical had been overlooked. Torres confirmed communication systems were functioning. Crawford checked his weapon systems. Patel verified medical supplies. Johnson ensured the breaching equipment was secure. 2 minutes, the pilot announced. The helicopter began to descend, dropping fast toward a clearing that satellite imagery had identified as suitable for insertion. Sarah felt her stomach lift slightly with the descent, the familiar sensation of controlled falling. She breathed steadily, keeping her heart rate under control through years of training. 30 seconds. Good luck down there? The helicopter flared, slowing its descent. Before it could fully land, the team was already moving. They jumped out into the darkness, spreading out to form a defensive perimeter as the aircraft lifted away immediately. Within seconds, the sound of rotors faded into the distance, and they were alone. The silence was profound. Sarah activated her night vision, the world transforming into shades of green. The fog was exactly where it should be, a thick blanket in the valley below them. She checked her GPS, confirmed their position, and signaled the team to move out. They descended into the fog like ghosts entering another world. Visibility dropped to less than 10 meters. But their thermal imaging cut through the mist, showing heat signatures and terrain features. They moved in tight formation, Red at the rear, Sarah at point. The team arranged to provide maximum coverage and mutual support. The first 2 kilometers passed without incident. The terrain was exactly as Sarah had studied, rocky and steep, but navigable for a well-trained team. They maintained discipline, moving silently despite the challenging ground. Every sound could carry in the night air. Enemy listening posts were a constant concern. At the 3-kilometer mark, Sarah raised a fist, signaling a halt. Through her thermal sight, she had detected heat signatures ahead. 2 figures positioned near the trail they needed to cross. An enemy patrol, exactly where intelligence suggested they might be, but also exactly in the path of the team's planned route. Reed moved up beside her, studying the situation through his own optics. He pointed to a narrow ravine that branched off their current position, a possible bypass. Sarah considered it, but shook her head. The ravine would add 30 minutes to their timeline and would take them dangerously close to a known enemy compound. Instead, she signaled a different plan. Torres and Johnson would create a diversion 300 meters to the east, drawing the patrol away from the crossing point. The rest of the team would use that window to move past undetected. It was a risk, but it minimized exposure and kept them on schedule. Torres and Johnson moved out, silent shadows in the fog. Sarah watched them go, counting seconds in her head. At precisely the agreed time, she heard a sound in the distance, like rocks tumbling down a slope. Natural enough to not raise immediate alarm, but interesting enough to draw attention. Through her thermal sight, Sarah saw the 2 enemy soldiers react. They spoke briefly, then moved toward the source of the sound, their weapons ready, but not yet alarmed. The moment they were out of visual range, Sarah signaled her team forward. They crossed the danger zone in less than a minute, moving fast but controlled. Once they were clear, Sarah positioned Crawford to provide overwatch while they waited for Torres and Johnson to rejoin them. The seconds stretched out, each one feeling longer than the last. Then 2 shapes materialized from the fog, and the team was whole again. Sarah checked her watch. They were actually ahead of schedule by 7 minutes. She allowed herself a moment of cautious optimism before refocusing on the next phase of the mission. The approach to the compound took another hour of careful movement. As dawn began to hint at the eastern horizon, they reached their observation position on a ridge overlooking the target location. The compound was a collection of stone buildings arranged in a rough square, with guards visible at two corners. Satellite imagery had shown this layout, but seeing it in person provided crucial details that cameras couldn't capture. Sarah studied the guard patterns through her scope, timing their movements, looking for the gaps that her plan depended on. The guards changed position every 8 minutes, rotating between posts in a predictable pattern. During the transition, there was a 12-second window where the courtyard was unwatched. 12 seconds to cover 50 meters and reach the building where intelligence suggested the hostages were being held. Reed crawled up beside her, his breath visible in the cold morning air. The guard pattern matches your timeline. Shift change is in 4 minutes. We move on the shift change, Sarah confirmed. Johnson, you're on the door. Torres, communication intercept. Crawford, overwatch position. Patel, with me. Reed, you coordinate from here and provide extraction cover if needed. The team acknowledged with hand signals, moving into position with practiced efficiency. Sarah felt the familiar pre-combat rush, adrenaline sharpening her senses, while training kept her movements calm and controlled. This was the moment everything came down to. Weeks of planning compressed into the next few minutes of execution. 3 minutes. The eastern sky was lightening, the fog beginning to thin as the sun's warmth touched the valley. They had to move before visibility improved too much. 2 minutes. Sarah could see her breath, could feel her heartbeat strong and steady. Torres was in position with the signal jamming equipment that would prevent the guards from calling for reinforcement. Crawford had his rifle trained on the guard posts, ready to eliminate threats if stealth failed. 1 minute. Johnson approached the compound's side entrance, a wooden door that was old enough to be vulnerable to the tools he carried. Sarah and Patel moved with him, staying low, using every bit of available cover. 30 seconds. The guards began their rotation, walking away from their posts toward the building where they would report before the next shift took over. The courtyard was empty. Go, Sarah whispered into her radio. They moved as one, covering the 50 meters in a controlled sprint. Johnson reached the door first, his tools already working on the simple lock. Sarah and Patel provided cover, weapons ready, scanning for any sign they had been spotted. The lock clicked open. 8 seconds had elapsed. They slipped inside, and Johnson eased the door closed behind them. The interior was dark and cold, a hallway of stone that smelled of damp and neglect. Sarah activated a tactical light mounted on her weapon, keeping the beam low and focused. Intelligence had suggested the hostages would be in the basement level, in rooms that could be secured easily. They found stairs leading down, and Sarah descended carefully, testing each step for creaks or instability. At the bottom, a corridor stretched ahead with 3 doors visible. Behind one of those doors were the people they had come to save. Sarah tried the first door. It opened to reveal an empty room with chains attached to the wall, but no occupants. The second door was locked. Johnson moved forward with his tools, working quickly. The lock was more sophisticated than the exterior door, but he was skilled. After 30 seconds that felt like hours, it clicked open. Inside, 3 figures huddled against the far wall, their eyes adjusting to the sudden light. Dr. Martinez, gaunt and pale but alive. Jennifer Walsh, her face bruised but her eyes alert and fierce. David Kim, favoring one leg, but otherwise appearing intact. "We're United States military," Sarah said quietly. "We're here to take you home." Martinez stared at her as if she were a mirage. "How did you get past the guards?" Carefully, Sarah replied. "Can you all walk?" "I can manage," Martinez said, though his voice was weak. "David twisted his ankle 2 days ago, but he's mobile." "Jennifer is fine." "Good," Sarah spoke into her radio. "Package secured. 3 hostages, all mobile. Beginning extraction." Reed's voice came back immediately. "Guard shift is complete. You have approximately 8 minutes before the new guards make their first rounds past your position. 8 minutes to get out of the building, across the courtyard, and into the fog before alarm was raised. Sarah helped Martinez to his feet while Patel checked the hostages for injuries that might slow them down. Johnson led the way back up the stairs, his weapon ready. They reached the ground floor without incident, but as they approached the exit, Sarah heard voices outside. Guards speaking casually, probably the new shift settling into their posts. They were directly between the team and their escape route. Sarah made a quick decision. Alternative exit. The window on the north wall. It wasn't part of the original plan, but the mission required adaptation. They moved to the window Johnson had identified during their approach study. It was small, but large enough for people to fit through one at a time. Johnson opened it carefully, checking the area outside. Clear, he whispered. They went through quickly, helping the hostages navigate the awkward exit. Sarah went last, pulling herself through, just as she heard shouts from inside the building. Someone had discovered the open door to the basement. The alarm was being raised earlier than planned. Move now, Sarah ordered, abandoning stealth for speed. They ran across open ground toward the fog line, Crawford providing covering fire from his overwatch position. Bullets struck the ground near them, kicking up dirt and stone. Sarah heard Jennifer gasp, but kept moving. They reached the fog and plunged into its concealing embrace, just as heavier weapons opened fire behind them. Torres, jam everything, Sarah commanded. Crawford, fall back to Rally Point Alpha. The team moved through the fog with practiced coordination, supporting the hostages, maintaining defensive positions, and putting distance between themselves and the compound. Behind them, confused shouts and random gunfire suggested the enemy was struggling to organize pursuit in the limited visibility. They reached the first waypoint, a rocky outcrop that provided cover and a defensive position. Sarah did a quick head count. Everyone was present, no casualties. Martinez was breathing hard but keeping up. Kim was limping but mobile. Walsh looked shaken but determined. Status report, Sarah demanded. Communications jammed successfully, Torres reported. They can't coordinate with their other units for at least 10 minutes. No visual contact since we entered the fog, Crawford added. But they'll be coming, and we keep moving, Sarah said. We have 4 hours to reach the extraction point. Patel, check the hostages. 2-minute break, then we move. Patel quickly examined each former captive. Martinez is hypoglycemic and dehydrated, but he can continue. Kim's ankle is sprained, but stable. Walsh is fine, just adrenaline shock. She distributed water and energy bars from her pack. As the team rested and regrouped, Red appeared from the fog, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. That went sideways fast. But we're clear for now. Next problem is the valley crossing. That's where they'll set up ambushes if they figure out our route. They won't figure it out, Sarah said, with more confidence than she felt. We're not using any logical extraction route. By the time they deploy to intercept us, we'll already be past their positions. The trek that followed was a test of endurance and will. They moved through difficult terrain, always choosing the path less traveled. The route that no reasonable military unit would attempt. They waded through a freezing stream, climbed over rock formations that tore at their equipment, and pushed through dense underbrush that concealed their movement but slowed their progress. Martinez struggled increasingly as the hours passed. His heart condition was being tested by the exertion and altitude. Twice they had to stop so Patel could administer medication and monitor his vital signs. Each stop cost them precious minutes and increased the risk of being overtaken by pursuers. At the 6-hour mark, they were behind schedule by 30 minutes and still had 2 kilometers to go. Sarah could hear distant sounds of pursuit, organized now with the enemy using tracking dogs and systematic search patterns. The race was getting closer. We need to move faster, Johnson urged. They're gaining on us. Martinez can't go faster, Patel said firmly. Push him harder and his heart will give out. Then, we've rescued a corpse. Sarah made another crucial decision. Crawford, Johnson, you to take Martinez and the other hostages ahead at maximum speed. Torres, Patel, Reed, and I will stay back and slow down the pursuit. Reed looked at her sharply. That's splitting the team. Violates every principle of tactical movement. So does getting caught before we reach extraction, Sarah countered. Get the hostages out. That's the priority. We'll delay the enemy, then catch up. Crawford hesitated but nodded. He and Johnson helped Martinez to his feet and began moving with the 3 hostages toward the quarter extraction point at a faster pace than the full group could manage. Sarah positioned her remaining team members in defensive positions overlooking the trail they had been following. Within 10 minutes, they could see movement below, enemy soldiers working their way up the valley with trained efficiency. We can't engage directly, Reed said quietly. We're outnumbered at least 3 to 1. Don't need to engage, Sarah replied. We just need to make them cautious, slow them down. She turned to Torres. Can you trigger a controlled rock slide about 200 meters downslope? Torres studied the terrain and smiled. Yes, ma'am. Give me 2 minutes. What followed was a masterclass in misdirection and psychological warfare. Torres used small explosive charges to create rock slides that blocked the main trail. Sarah and Reed took carefully aimed shots that didn't hit anyone but convinced the enemy that they were facing a larger, well-entrenched defensive position. Patel used smoke grenades to create the illusion of tear gas deployment. The enemy's advance slowed to a crawl as they began treating the asphyxiation as a prepared ambush rather than a fleeing extraction team. By the time they realized the deception, Sarah's team was already withdrawing, moving quickly now that they weren't burdened with protecting exhausted hostages. They caught up with Crawford's group 1 kilometer from the extraction point. Martinez looked terrible, his face gray and his breathing labored, but he was still moving. Kim and Walsh were supporting him between them, determination overriding their own exhaustion. The extraction point appeared ahead, a clearing where 2 helicopters were scheduled to arrive. But as they approached, Sarah heard something that made her blood run cold. The sound of rotor blades, but coming from the wrong direction. Enemy aircraft, Reed shouted. Attack helicopters, 2 of them. They had minutes, maybe seconds, before those helicopters would have them in visual range. The enemy must have broken through the communication jamming, called for air support. Sarah's mind raced through options, none of them good. Then Torres spoke up, her voice excited despite the danger. Captain, the fog. It's rolling back in from the valley. Look, Sarah turned and saw it, a wall of thick mist sweeping back into the lower elevations as morning temperatures shifted. It was the same thermal inversion that had covered their initial approach, returning now at exactly the moment they needed it most. Into the fog, Sarah ordered. Spread out. Use thermal blankets to mask your heat signatures. Make yourselves invisible. The team scattered into the returning fog bank just as the enemy helicopters roared overhead. Sarah crouched under her thermal blanket, a space-age material that would confuse infrared sensors, and watched the aircraft circle above. They were searching, but the fog was too thick, and the thermal camouflage was working. The helicopters spent 10 minutes hunting for targets they couldn't find, then withdrew, probably low on fuel and frustrated by the impossible visibility conditions. As soon as they were gone, Sarah gathered her team and pushed for the extraction point. They reached it with minutes to spare before the scheduled pickup. Sarah pulled out a signal device and activated it, sending an encrypted burst transmission that would guide their extraction aircraft to the precise location. Now they just had to wait and hope that enemy forces on the ground didn't reach them first. The wait was agonizing. Every sound could be approaching soldiers. Every shadow could be a threat. Martinez collapsed, his strength finally exhausted. Patel was providing emergency cardiac support, but his condition was deteriorating rapidly. Then, like salvation from the sky, Sarah heard the sound she had been waiting for. American helicopters, flying in fast and low, guided by her signal. They touched down in the clearing, and the team rushed the hostages aboard. Martinez was carried on a stretcher. Kim and Walsh helped themselves up, and the team piled in after them. As the helicopter lifted off, Sarah looked down at the valley where they had spent the past 12 hours. Enemy forces were emerging from the tree line, firing uselessly at aircraft that were already out of effective range. The mission had succeeded by the narrowest of margins. Reed sat down heavily beside her, removing his helmet and wiping sweat from his face. That, he said with feeling, was the most insane mission I've ever been part of. And somehow, you pulled it off. Sarah smiled tiredly. We pulled it off. The team made it happen. Don't be modest, Reed replied. This was your plan, your leadership. I owe you an apology, Captain. I doubted you from the beginning. I was wrong. Torres leaned over from her seat across the aircraft. We all doubted, sir, but she earned our trust. Earned it the hard way. The flight back to base took 2 hours. They used the time to tend to injuries, rehydrate, and slowly come down from the adrenaline high of combat operations. Martinez stabilized under Patel's care, his vital signs improving once they got fluids and medication into him. By the time they landed, he was conscious and asking questions about what had happened. The helicopter touched down on the base landing pad, where a medical team was waiting. Martinez and Kim were immediately transferred to the field hospital. Walsh insisted she was fine and walked off under her own power, though medical personnel followed her anyway. Commander Harrison was waiting as the team disembarked. Sarah approached him, still wearing her combat gear, her face streaked with camouflage paint and dirt. She came to attention and saluted. Harrison returned the salute, then surprised her by extending his hand. Welcome back, Captain Chen. I've received preliminary reports from your team. Sounds like you had quite an adventure. The mission was successful, sir, Sarah replied simply. 3 hostages recovered, no friendly casualties. The enemy sustained some delays and confusion, but no significant casualties on their side either. Harrison actually smiled. I believe I owe you something, Captain. Specifically, I owe you the admission that I was wrong. You asked for a chance to prove yourself, and you exceeded every expectation. That mission should have been impossible, but you made it look almost routine. It wasn't routine, sir, Sarah said honestly. It was chaos from start to finish. But we adapted. The team performed brilliantly, and luck was on our side when we needed it. Luck favors the prepared, Harrison replied. And you were nothing if not prepared. He handed her a folder. I'm recommending you for a commendation. More importantly, I'm putting your name forward for advanced tactical leadership training. We need officers who can think unconventionally and execute under pressure. You've proven you're that kind of officer? Sarah took the folder, feeling the weight of recognition she had worked so hard to achieve. But more than personal accomplishment, she felt satisfaction that her team had come home safe, that 3 innocent people were free, and that her unconventional approach had been validated. Reed approached, having ditched his own gear. Captain, the team wants to grab food and debrief informally. You should join us. I'd like that, Sarah said. As they walked toward the mess hall, Crawford fell into step beside her. So, Captain, what's next? Back to desk duty and simulation planning? Sarah thought about Commander Harrison's offer, about the advanced training and the opportunities that were now opening up. But more than that, she thought about the satisfaction of leading a team through impossible odds, of making split-second decisions that saved lives, of proving that unconventional thinking could overcome traditional obstacles. Whatever comes next, she said, it won't be boring. The team laughed, and they entered the mess hall together, not as a captain and her subordinates, but as soldiers who had faced death together and come out the other side stronger. Sarah knew that this mission would define her career, that she would be forever known as the officer who broke every rule and won. But more importantly, she had learned that earning respect wasn't about following a predetermined path or conforming to others' expectations. It was about competence, courage, and the willingness to stand behind your convictions, even when everyone else doubted. Commander Harrison had laughed at her plan. Her team had doubted her leadership. The mission had been deemed nearly impossible by experts with decades of experience. Yet here she stood, successful against all odds, proof that sometimes the best way forward is the one nobody else sees. As she sat with her team, sharing a meal and swapping stories about the mission's chaotic moments, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Not just satisfaction or pride, but belonging. She had found her place, proven her worth, and forged bonds that would last a lifetime. The road ahead would bring new challenges, harder missions, and bigger obstacles. But Sarah Chen was ready for all of it. She had learned that rules were meant to be broken when following them meant failure. She had discovered that leadership wasn't about commanding respect, but earning it through action and integrity. And she had proven, once and for all, that underestimating someone based on preconceptions was a mistake, because the person everyone doubted had just accomplished what the experts considered impossible, and in doing so, had changed not just her own future, but the way her entire command thought about unconventional warfare. The commander had laughed at her. Now he was recommending her for commendation. And somewhere in the Karzai Valley, enemy forces were trying to figure out how a small team had penetrated their defenses, rescued 3 hostages, and vanished like ghosts in the fog. That mystery would haunt them. But for Sarah and her team, it was just another day of proving that preparation, determination, and the courage to think differently could overcome any obstacle. The mission was complete. The hostages were safe. And Captain Sarah Chen had earned her place among the elite.